Okay, so here is our Chapter 13 video. We're talking about professional selling. And selling is really part of direct marketing, but it's so different that, that it's its own thing. And so it gets its own chapter because it is so different. What do salespeople do? And I'm sure we've all encountered salespeople in our life, and some of you probably are salespeople, but hopefully we'll look at it from a slightly different perspective and learn a little bit more about it. Salespeople create value for their firms. They create value for their customers. They manage relationships. And that's one of the key things, is that they have this one-to-one relationship with the customers. And that's what makes it very unique from other forms of marketing. And they also provide information from the customer back back to the company, from the customer, what's going on. So they're a huge source of information for the company about what's working and what's not, and what's going on in other areas. And they know why they're losing sales, and so what the company needs to do to change that. They have a responsibility to the company, but they also have a responsibility to the buyer. And so sometimes that can see, the responsibility to the company is to get them as much revenue as possible. The responsibility to the customer is to get them the best deal. And so that can sometimes conflict, which, is also a little bit different in what we're doing. So do they sell something to somebody if they really don't need it, just to make the sale and be good for the company? Or is that, and what we're going to find with any of these is that generally, everything we've talked about in marketing so far has been about building long-term relationships with customers. And that's no different in sales. And so if you talk somebody into something that's not the best fit for them, that might get you one sale, but that's not going to get you repeat sales. And so this is just, again, they are the representative of the company to the customer, but they are also the representative of the customer back to the company. And so they serve both roles, which can be tricky. Responsibilities of the salesman. They have to create value for the company and for the customer. It's not appropriate for everything. There are some things where a salesperson doesn't add any value. So for company and for customer. And sometimes the salesperson isn't adding any value, in which case they're not needed. They do especially if people need to be educated about something, or trained in something, or you really need some expertise. That's where they really add value. They manage relationships. They have to decide, it's a lot of time. That's very time consuming, right? And so it's hard to maintain the same relationship with everybody and make everybody feel like you're the only company. But that's not the same thing as making friends. That's not really their job. Although sometimes it might kind of seem like it. What's a G? Okay. And then the other thing is getting information. And they are the ones that are out there in the world. So they get information from their customers. They get information from competitors. And from other people in the marketing, just the entire environment. Sometimes it's suppliers, sometimes it's other people related to that industry. But they get that, and they get a lot of insight from these people, and some very useful information back to the company about what's going on. Different types of sales position. Some people are what we call order getters. They have to go out and get sales. And so missionary salespeople call on people who make decisions but don't actually buy them. This is generally business to business. And trade salespeople call on retailers and try to get them to display stuff. So that's also, but this would be LG's representative to Best Buy or something like that. That would be a trade salesperson. So prospectors, these are the ones that have to go out there and find the prospects, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, the potential customers. This is cold calling. They go out there and they're knocking on doors and trying to get potential or sometimes they're just trying to set up things. I have a friend that works for Valpak, and some of her appointments are scheduled ahead of time, but the rest of the time she is knocking on doors of businesses trying to get them to set up an appointment and that kind of thing. And so that's a lot of she's kind of doing multiple things in there. But prospectors can be business to business or business to consumer. An account manager responsible for ongoing business with a customer who uses the product. So that's like my textbook rep or something like that. An order taker is somebody like a sales clerk or salesperson who people call in and you just kind of take the order. So that's a little bit different than most of what we're talking about is going to be on these order getters here. A retail sales clerk does some selling, so these guys will need some of the same selling skills, but less of that because the people have come to you, so you don't have to go out and find customers. But you can see some of these steps in the process. Like if you work retail, you'll recognize some of these steps in here, but maybe not all of them. And then sales support, they might take after the sale, customer service type things after the sale, or the tech support, or even just like the administrative end of it to help make the sales and qualifying prospects and that sort of thing. The relationships are a little bit different. Especially in business to business here, you might see one large customer instead of a bunch of smaller customers. We want to identify these lead users because that can really help us get new products out and get the word out and that kind of thing. And market influencers who maybe aren't even their customers but who can recommend things. Well, for instance, like the textbooks. You're the users of the textbook. You're the ones that buy the textbook, but I'm the one that picks the textbook. So that would be a market influencer. So salespeople have to maintain relationships with all these big customers, small customers, users, decision makers, gatekeepers that decide who gets to talk to the boss, and these market influencers. So different types of sales relationships here. Transactional relationship, each one is a separate, there's really no ongoing relationship. No interest in that. I just want to get my gas today or my bread and milk. I don't want a relationship with that. So that's a lot of things like that. A functional relationship, limited ongoing relationships. I continue to buy from the same seller out of habit. I might still go to the same grocery store every day, but it's not because I have an important relationship with them. It's just because they're convenient and they have what I want. A selling relationship, an affiliative selling relationships, are more when we need a lot of expertise. So this might be my stockbroker or my accountant or something like that, where I need somebody to do that. And then a strategic partnership is when they're both equally invested. Both the buyer and the seller are interested in growing this whole thing, and so they're equal partners in this relationship. This was talking about different selling strategies, and different ones will work in different situations. A script-based or canned selling is when they just memorize and deliver the sales pitch verbatim. This would be, when you go to the mall and those guys are trying to sell you the hand thing, the lotion system, that's pretty much going to be, now they alter it somewhat, but that's going to be a standard pitch. Or when you go to the register and they're like, would you like to apply for a credit card? You could get 10% off today, that kind of a thing. And a lot of phone things would be like that. Need satisfaction selling, though. You're asking specific question to identify the buyer's needs and then tailoring the sales pitch. So you're not really tailoring the product, but you are tailoring the sales pitch. And that is really all about listening. You ask the questions, but you need to listen to the answers, and then you kind of alter your pitch for that. Consultative selling, the salesperson has special expertise, and this will be a customized solution. So this might be, you listen to what their problem, and then you kind of build the product based on that. But these are going to be for complex things. It might be and these would be big purchases generally, but it could be something like a custom home or something like that that's custom made. And then the strategic partner ones, both parties are investing equal expertise and resources, so it's more of a partnership than a salesman-customer relationship for that one. Choosing the right strategy. Different strategies are going to work in different things. They don't always match up. Like I had 4 of these and 4 of these, but they don't always. They will sort of align, but not always. And so the important thing here again is listening. Different strategies at different times, and a lot of it depends on how the buyer wants to buy and what information they need. Sometimes they want a little more hand-holding. Sometimes they know what they want, and they don't want to build a relationship. This is the typical selling process. I'm going to back up here and talk about the pre-approach, because I don't think your book spends nearly enough time on this one. The pre-approach is a lot about prospecting, and qualifying. So prospecting is about finding leads. We'll talk about leads in a bit. Finding prospective buyers, people who might be in the market for my product. Qualifying then is narrowing down those leads to people who are likely to buy my product. And the more time you spend here, the more efficient the rest of this is going to be. You're not going to be wasting your time trying to sell to people who your product does not meet their needs. And so prospecting and qualifying is very, very important. Then we'll kind of talk about these, but I want to point out here that the most important skill a salesperson has through this entire process is listening. An effective salesperson isn't one who focuses on delivering a message. It's one who focuses on listening to the customer, and that's going to keep coming out here. But you're not going to be able to go through this process unless you are a good listener, and that's something I think that that makes or breaks a salesperson, and you'll see in here. But that is, I think people think about salespeople as talkers, but really the best ones are good listeners. The pre-approach and the planning. Again, this is that before we even approach the people, we've got that prospecting and qualifying, narrowing down those leads, finding the leads, and then narrowing them down. And then even once you've got that lead narrowed down, the pre-approach and the planning is also very important. You can see when I do this, there's a lot of work involved before we actually are talking to potential customers. Learning as much about, what this pre-approach and planning about here is really learning as much as you can So this would be what you would do first, the prospecting and the qualifying. Once you've got a list of qualified leads, you've narrowed that down, this is the next step, the pre-approach and the planning. Now you need to learn as much as you can about these prospects. Who are they currently buying from? How much do they use? Learn as much as you can about that company. Sometimes you can do a lot of this in the phone call. When you're setting up the appointment, you're asking questions. You can do a lot of research on the internet to find out as much as you can about the people you're dealing with and the company that you're dealing with and what their current uses are before you get there. It can't always happen. Like, again, if somebody's approaching you, you're not going to be able to do a lot of this pre-approach or this planning. But the more you can learn about them, the more you're going to be able to customize your sales pitch to them. When you get to the approach part, needs identification is really important. And again, this is about listening. All right. The spin outline is a good one. The situation, the problem, the implication, and the needs payoff. And so Again, this is about listening to them. You have to identify, you have to analyze the situation. You have to figure out what the problem is. And sometimes the potential customer doesn't really know what the problem is. Again, they're kind of looking at symptoms, and so you have to figure out what their problem is, and then show them how you can solve that problem. Is what you're doing. Can't do that without listening to them. You might have to involve multiple people in there. In a simple situation, you might not need it. My problem is that I'm hungry, so let me show you how I can solve that. So sometimes it's fairly simple, but sometimes it's really complex, and you have to really get to the root of the problem. But ultimately, in any situation, you're solving a problem here. And so the better you can show them how your product solves their problem, whatever that is, the more sales you're going to get. So the presentation part is where I use what I learned use what you've heard. So I've been listening. I've been learning about the company. I've been listening to the customer. Now you're showing off your product. You're showing the features, the evidence to support it. So here's what's great about my product. Here's the evidence behind it. Here's how it benefits you. And then you try to come to an agreement on this. So that's one of those kind of standard things. There's a ton of these little acronyms in sales. There's tons of sales videos on YouTube, and they love these little acronym things. But I've been listening now. I know what their problem is, right? I know what their problem is. And now in this presentation, I show how I can solve it. Again, this is not so much with the can selling or the transactional relationships. We're kind of talking about some of those other ones. But you can't show them how you can solve their problem if you don't understand what their problem is. So you have to do that listening part first before you can get to this one. The next step is handling objections. Now, here's the key. This is where, if you've been listening all along, this step should be easy. If you haven't been listening, this is not going to be easy. And generally, a good salesperson has been reading signals throughout the approach and throughout the presentation, throughout the listening and the presentation. And they know what the objections are going to be. A good salesperson sees, you can read the look in their eye, their body language and all that, and they can see that everything was great till they got to the price. So they know that's going to be their big objection. They might say they need, and also there's all kinds of little cues in here too. Most people, even though they say it's price, it's not about price. It's because you have not solved their problem. So if there's certain cues too, if they say I need more time to think about it, or if they say this as their objection, and most of the time you've got the same objections over and over. A good salesperson knows what they're saying is this. What they really mean is, I have not convinced them yet that this solves their problem. But again, if you're watching, you can see that they cooled down on this feature. You can see which features are most important to them. As again, you're reading the language during they're reading their cues during the presentation. So if you've been listening all along, this person should be, because again, if there's an objection, it's because you haven't solved their problem. So either you misinterpreted what their problem was, or you weren't listening, you were just all caught up in your own presentation. So once you handle the objections, and sometimes people object, they've already decided they're going to buy it, but they feel the need to object to try to negotiate on the price or that kind of thing. And again, the more experience you have with this, the more you're going to be able to recognize that. The closing. This is also an important kind of a thing. A good salesperson knows the right time to close. There are lots of different ways. Direct request. Are you ready to Are you ready to purchase now? You just come right out and ask. And sometimes beginner salespeople are afraid to come right out and ask, but that's really an important step. Knowing when to do it is also very important. A minor point, you kind of imply that you've come to an agreement, and so you say, blah, 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 okay, would you like that in black or navy? And so you pick some minor point, but you kind of like, it's called an assumptive close. I think that's the word. You assume that they're going to buy it, and now it's just this minor point. How did you want to finance that? That kind of a thing. And then a summary, again, is you've given this whole presentation, you want to summarize the major points, the major features and benefits, summarize how it solves that problem. And again, if you've been listening all along, you should know when the right time is and which approach to use. The sales cycle, leads are when I get contact information about somebody that might be interested in this. A suspect is somebody who has an interest, but it's too early to tell yet. A prospect is somebody who has the budget, the authority, the needs, and the time. And so that's kind of what you have, these leads, and you need to funnel those into prospects. If this person might be interested but doesn't have the authority to make the decision or doesn't have the budget for this right now, then they're not going to turn into a prospect. And so this is that, you see the qualifying here, but this is, again, determining who has this is that qualifying part of the process. And then once they decide to buy it, they become a customer. Metrics used by salespeople, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these, but again, it's becoming increasingly, they have to prove their worth, just like a lot of other aspects of marketing. And so, in general, salespeople are evaluated based on how much revenue they generate. So, conversion ratios, or how many prospects you turn into customers. Activity might be how many sales you make in a certain period of time, or even just how many sales calls you make. The win-loss analysis is after you've talked to somebody, you look and see which sales I make, which ones didn't, why. And then the way they're compensated, some of them get a salary, some of them get a commission, which is based on per sale, and some of them get a bonus based on how many sales calls you made, even if they weren't effective or something like that. Sales managers, the people managing these, might look at they'll look at those, but they'll also want to look at market share, how much time they spend in the field, are their customers satisfied? Again, that's another really important one, because that's going to look at not just the one-time sales, but ongoing sales is a really important one. That shows that they really are solving the customer's problems. Ethical issues, salespeople are going to come up with a lot of things, more so than some of the other marketers. They might want to ask for, sometimes your customers are asking you for information about somebody else who might be your customer, but that's their competitor, and that would put you in an awkward position. Gifts is another one. In some industries, that's really a big no-no, like in banking, you can't take gifts or anything, but I was in the doctor's office, and one of the pharmaceutical sales reps comes in and wants to talk to the doctors, and they have to get through the people at the front desk, right? Those are the gatekeepers. Those are the people that decide whether, as a salesperson, you get to see the decision maker or not. So sometimes it's the receptionist or whatever. But anyway, to get through them, and the receptionist said, "Do you do lunch?" "Absolutely, I can provide lunch." So in some things, that's kind of standard. There's a part of me that thinks that's a little shifty, like, I'm not even going to talk to you unless you're going to buy lunch, which makes it seem less about how good the product is and more about what the doctor's office is getting out of it. But that is standard practice in a lot of industries. Sometimes the buyer's asking you for something that you're not supposed to provide, but you could, so do you do that to get the sale and keep the customer happy? The other thing is the time. Your schedule is very flexible, and so you have to be very. Some people are like, I'll just take the day off and I'll make up for it later. I'll work extra hard tomorrow. But successful salespeople really don't do this. They're the ones that are out there all the time. But it is tough. You have to have a lot of self-discipline because the schedule is so flexible. So the last thing I want to kind of talk about is what marketing does for sales and what sales does for marketing. They're connected, right? It's all still part of the marketing process, but they generally see themselves as different departments. So the marketing department should make things easier for the salespeople. Their activities should create awareness, create excitement, so that makes it easier for the salesperson when they get there, because people are already aware of the product, excited about the product, interested. The marketing department is the one that's doing a lot of printed material that the salespeople will use. Good marketing can also improve these conversion ratios. So the process of identifying and qualifying those leads to turn those leads into prospects, the marketing department can really help with that. And again, the more effective they are at identifying leads, the more of those leads will turn into prospects, the more those prospects will turn into customers. So they can really help by providing effective leads. Lead scoring, again, this is some of that qualifying stuff that we are talked about. They take these leads and they qualify them as a hot lead, somebody who's probably close to buying, somebody who needs or somebody who's cold. That can really help the salesperson know where to focus their time. They can also, again, provide material that helps, and really they should work together, right, to develop some of this material. This is a way to manage this. So the marketing people are at a trade show and they identify a lead. Here's someone who has expressed an interest. Then they score it, right? This is part of that qualifying thing. And then they pass that lead on. If it's a hot lead, the salespeople will call it immediately. Hopefully they make the call and they close the sale. They report back to marketing, yes, this was a good hot lead. So whatever you're using here is pretty effective. Or the opposite could happen. The marketing says this is a hot lead, and it turns out they weren't. They give that information back to the marketing department, who then reevaluates their scoring process here so that they're passing on more effective leads. So it also helps the marketing decide which trade shows to go to, and so this information will improve the effectiveness for the whole process. But sales provides a service for marketing as well. It works back this way. The salespeople are out there talking to the customers every day. They are the eyes and ears of the company. More than anybody else, they're the ones that know what the customer wants, which is what marketing needs to know, right? So they communicate this information back. They represent the customers. They express their ideas. And they also have a good eye on the competition. They know what their competitors are doing. And the salespeople can really help build this customer relationship management system. What's selling, what's not, what do people say, well, I would buy yours if you had this, or I'm not going to get from you because so-and-so has this. And so there's a lot of information about what the customers want, what the competitors are doing, and that's an invaluable source of information. Okay, there's chapter 13.